Hello and welcome. You're watching this special broadcast here on WION. I have with me Senator Larry Pressler of the United States. Senator Pressler, welcome and thank you for speaking to WION. Now, you've written this latest book of yours, Neighbors in Arms, an American Senator's Quest for Disarmament in a Nuclear Subcontinent. I will come to the text, context and subtext of your book in a bit, but let me dive straight in and ask you a very pointed question. Based on your experience and your observations of the Indian subcontinent, namely India, Pakistan and its other neighbors, with the benefit of hindsight, Senator Pressler, is Pakistan a fit case to be declared a state sponsor of terrorism?
Well, I think it is, yes, and that's one of the recommendations in my book. And I believe that the new Trump administration may well be moving in that direction. Now, it's hard to say exactly, but our Secretary of Defense and our Secretary of State have both indicated that we are moving in that direction. But irrespective of that, and this is not a book that just is, I told you so, but I was working on this since the 1970s, and I think that we could have prevented nuclear weapons in both Pakistan and North Korea. Right now, because of the North Korean situation, there's kind of a public awakening about the danger that the United States could be struck with a nuclear weapon. We thought after the Soviet Union reclined a bit that that era was over, but people are back fully engaged on the issue of a nuclear attack on the United States. Now, I contend that Pakistan is more dangerous because I believe that somehow some of the tactical nuclear weapons that are in Pakistan could hemorrhage out. But in any event, Pakistan's behavior and lying and so forth, to the United States at least, and their harboring of Osama bin Laden, I mean, I can't believe that they deny that they knew that he was inside their country, things like that. It just convinced me that they should be declared a terrorist state.
Senator, you said that in your estimation, you do think Pakistan should be declared a terrorist state, but the fact remains that the successive US administrations have not done so yet. Why is the US or its allies so reluctant to call Pakistan's bluff?
Well, this has been a very frustrating story because I think that, and I knew Ronald Reagan on a personal basis for lots of other issues than this, Alzheimer's disease and all kinds of issues he was interested in other committees I was serving on. But I think he was convinced of this, but we have what I define in this book as the octopus, which is a very hard thing to define, but our government has been taken over by big money and by military contractors and by related law firms.
Which President Trump, by the way, calls the swamp, and he wants to drain the swamp?
Yes, yes, and it's hard to do, but that struck a great chord. Whatever one thinks about Donald Trump, he was able to tweet or express things that, and I come from the Midwest originally. I'm living in Washington, D.C. now, but we're in what they call the flyover states, where you fly from New York to San Francisco. You might look out the window at Iowa and South Dakota. But there was kind of a feeling that we're being neglected. Us older white guys are being neglected. And that has caused the United States to be, in foreign policy, it makes us more isolationistic, I think. But that is what President Trump was able to tap into, I think, more so, or to identify with. Whereas my impression was that Hillary Clinton, a very fine candidate, but she somehow got into the, we call it the New York-San Francisco syndrome, where you fly back and forth and sort of look out the window at all the rest of us. So there was, however illogical that is, there was a lot of that feeling of trying to do something new.
I want to draw your attention back to the Indian subcontinent and the situation obtaining here even as we speak. Now, most recently, we heard the Pakistani Foreign Minister Khwaja Asif speak in the US at an Asia Society event, where he, in response to a question, he said that, don't blame us, blame the US. And the context was, according to him, that the US is equally to be blamed for the situation obtaining insofar as terrorism is concerned, because the US at one point of time was arming these very terrorists to oust or evict the Soviets from Afghanistan. So he says, well, these terrorists were your darlings. By your, I mean the US's darlings. How would you respond to this submission of the Pakistani foreign minister?
Well, you know, I'm not a member of the government, so I would say that I agree with part of it. Now, going way back, I happen to be a Vietnam combat veteran. I didn't necessarily agree with the Vietnam War or disagree with it, but I got caught up in it. And as a result of that, I'm very much against boots on the ground. I very much think that the Iraq War was a mistake, and I think that President Trump is making a mistake if he's planning to commit more ground troops there, because of the basic fact, and I served on the Foreign Relations Committee a number of years, and I'm fascinated with the formulation of foreign policy. But one thing I'm absolutely convinced of is that we cannot send American soldiers into a foreign country where they don't speak the language, where they've had no training in diplomacy or anything except firing their weapon, and expect to make friends. That just doesn't work, period. That's me talking. And so I was against sending, but I've been in several meetings in Washington with, and I was privileged to know several presidents, but I was a very serious player in some of these matters. But I found it passing strange that almost never does an actual Vietnam veteran or an actual combat veteran ever want to send troops overseas. The guys that are these macho guys who didn't serve in the military, and I'm not against the people who didn't serve, that's all right, but they have all these adventure plans of sending troops here and there, and that's a great mistake, and we shouldn't send any more troops into Afghanistan. But that's another, well, that's part of my thinking. But but from day one, this thing in the way what I call the octopus favored Pakistan was a very dangerous thing.
Now, Senator, you've watched America's South Asia policy evolve over the decades, and you watched Pakistan from very close quarters, and you yourself have spoken about curtailing or stopping American aid, monetary and military aid to Pakistan. Now, India, for its part, says that America should indeed put a stop to it. Why? Because as a former Indian official told some of us in the media several years ago, American aid to Pakistan is like giving alcohol to an alcoholic. You should stop doing it, and you should stop immediately. Where do you stand on this issue? I mean, do you think it's time that the Americans, the government in particular, decided one way or another?
Absolutely. For a long time, I think that, well, first of all, going way back, we have the Pentagon, which is our generals and so forth, but then all the related arms contractors, all the law firms, all the consulting firms, all the related, and some of this is necessary. I mean, we have to have a safe country, and you know, since 9/11, you know, we can fly safely on our airlines. I have 4 grandchildren. I want them to live in a safe country. So it takes a certain amount of national defense and so forth. But this group has overtaken Washington, D.C., and Pakistan was their favorite state back in those days. It was, I want to pay tribute.
Is it still not their favorite state?
I think it's the Pentagon's favorite state still.
Still?
Although I wonder. But Pakistan, they could send one general over. You see, we have a whole military establishment, not necessarily the Octopus, but they've got the South America branch, the African branch, there's a whole world, and we're way overspending, we're way overextended, and we're going to be like ancient Rome in this century. And I think India is going to come up, and we're going to, with our deficit, if we keep these international commitments at the level that we have, and we have a lot of domestic, we have health care problems, we have floods in Puerto Rico and in the South that we're not adequately addressing. Our deficit is going to balloon up, and that will mean higher inflation eventually, and it will mean the weakening of the American dollar. And that will happen almost inevitably sometime in the next 10 years, and that will be a real crisis, and it will cause the United States to falter. I'm very much afraid. I care a great deal about my country.
Senator, a couple of quick questions. What, in specific terms, what would you want Trump to do? Should it cut military aid to Pakistan? Should it remove the non-NATO ally status?
Yes.
Should it, for instance, talk about declaring it as a rogue state or a sponsor of terrorism?
Yes.
Or all of these?
All of these. And the reason is that Pakistan has been a very devious state in the way it's dealt with the United States. The Prime Minister and the President of Pakistan have both come and stood before Congress in the old days and told straight out lies. George H.W. Bush, who enforced the Pressler Amendment for several years, felt he had been lied to. He had really tried to. It is a corrupt state, and I say this from years of hearings.
Is it a failed state yet?
Well, I don't know if it's failed entirely.
Or failing state?
It's not failing because it's propped up by the United States and the United States military and by China now, and so it may not be a failed state, but it's failed as far as we should not have any trust in their integrity from the way we've been treated, from what I have observed. These are my observations over the years. So that's part of why I wrote this book, because we cannot have normal relationships or any relationships. Now, some people say, well, then they're going to fall into the Chinese hands. Well, fine, I say, let China have them, because they are not my kind of people.
Mm-hmm. And just to follow up on your last point, we've heard George Bush speak about the so-called axis of evil in 2001, which included Iraq, Iran, North Korea. Cut to 2017, we have President Trump in the White House, and he speaks about the so-called new axis of evil in terms, which includes Iran, North Korea, and possibly Venezuela. Why is Pakistan not part of this so-called axis of evil?
Well, I think it should be
this when, by the way, the US itself has acknowledged and admitted and conceded that there are at least 20 designated terror groups operating from Pakistani soil.
Well, that's my message. That's what I'm trying to wake people up to. There are, and of course, not only the designated ones that are there, but for example, the whole Osama bin Laden story is unbelievable, that with a straight face Pakistan can say to us, we didn't know he was there. I mean, it's like you're dealing with a group of generals in the ISI. I don't think the elected part of Pakistan has anything to say about anything. Like they used to say, Mrs. Bhutto came over to the United States and she said she didn't know about the nuclear program or didn't know much about it. She may well have been telling the truth, because they probably didn't bother to tell her or wouldn't. So this is very hard for me to believe that we continue and now the Pakistani people, I love them, but it's the type of government they have, their leadership, the generals, and it's brutal. And the ISI is mainly, it checks into domestic. It's a domestic repression. It's a state that doesn't have the integrity. We shouldn't have. We should declare them a terrorist state. And let me say that I think, because it's kind of funny, what gets attention in the United States is that we're a very insular country, and I think we're becoming more isolationist. But we'd rather not think about foreign affairs. But the Korean thing has woken people up to nuclear, the possibility of nuclear attack on the United States. Nobody thinks Pakistan can attack the United States, but I'm trying to point out that somebody could, and I'd like to write a novel, maybe people, a public policy book like this, very few people will read. And it'll be read by policy wonks like me. But if somehow I dream of writing a short novel in which some nuclear bombs are either stolen or purchased and put on a pickup truck and driven across the land to Vietnam, and on Vietnam put on a ship and carried to Canada, and then come down through Alberta into North Dakota, and several American cities could be destroyed. So Pakistan is a very dangerous place in terms of nuclear proliferation of bombs. And I understand from what, and I no longer get intelligence briefings, but you can read the New York Times, and Pakistan has at least 4 to 7 operational regional nuclear commands that could be, one of them could be set off without the central government's approval.
So essentially what you're saying is that the threat of nuclear weapons falling into terrorist hands in Pakistan is not anymore in the realm of fiction, it is a clear and present danger?
Yes, I think it's very clear and present. I think that
Pakistan-North Korea axis or connection insofar as nuclear trade goes. We know for a fact that Pakistan did collaborate with North Korea in developing its nuclear weapons program. We know about Abdul Qadir Khan, AQ Khan in Pakistan. What do you make of Pakistan's complicity in aiding and abetting the North Korean crisis, which, by the way, is threatening to blow up in Trump's face?
Yeah, well, I would say that I'm a very patriotic American veteran and so forth, but I'm frequently a critic of our foreign policy. And I believe that our Octopus, the thing that I call our Octopus, allowed Pakistan to get nuclear weapons and and it should have been aware that it was talking to North Korea, but nobody thought, since that's way over there, they're not going to be a threat to us. And now all of a sudden, we think they are. So it's a very dangerous world. But I think Pakistan is more dangerous to the United States than North Korea is.
And Senator, you've spoken about joint India-US preemptive strikes to destroy Pakistani nukes. Could you elaborate?
Well, I'd be very hesitant about preemptive strikes, but I think the United States and India should be prepared, and it takes a great power to, that's one of the things in the new relationship. I'm afraid the new relationship, the so-called nuclear deal, is more an arms sale deal than it is. I mean, I'd rather be much more substantive on the soft power side. But I think Pakistan is so dangerous that we should be prepared, and we shouldn't be committed to just reacting. We might, for all they know, we might just do some action, and I think President Trump has said this, that he should not be. Now, that's another thing that we have to be careful about. It takes at least 18 people to launch a nuclear weapon to concur in the United States. The president can't just push a button on his desk. He's got to have the concurrence of the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of State and the Vice President and the President Pro Tem of the Senate. And I don't know, there's a procedural thing that, but they get those people together fairly quickly. I mean, they're all connected together. But it would take a collective decision to do something like that. So it'd be fairly hard to do. But I think we have to get ourselves into a position to do it and make it clear that we wouldn't rule out a preemptive strike.
Are you in any way suggesting that Pakistan's nuclear fidelity or the integrity of its chain of command is suspect?
It's suspect to me.
Or vulnerable?
It's suspect to me, yes it is.
And why do you say that?
Because the generals are so corrupt and inconsistent, and I do not see that I think that there are, and back when I got intelligence briefings, there were 3 or 4 groups of generals who were in different groups, and they each had control over 1 or 2 nuclear weapons, essentially. And obviously, in the normal course of things, they'd cooperate. But it's a very dangerous situation. It's a very unhealthy country. And I'm really sorry that India has them as a neighbor, but they're there, and I think we have to deal with it, and we can deal with it better. And I'm hoping that Trump will initiate a policy. Now, the Trump administration is doing a policy review on South Asia, particularly in regard to the traditional thing that you have 2 nation states, as Hans Morgenthau would say, and you treat them equally diplomatically. And we've been doing that. In fact, we've treated Pakistan in a more superior way frequently. But we should now embrace India completely and downgrade our relationships with Pakistan.
You spoke about Trump's South Asia strategy. Do you believe Trump or any American president has finally at least begun to get South Asia right?
Well, yes, I can't speak for Trump, and you know, he does appear to change his mind occasionally. But ironically, after all the controversy about Trump and his tweets and this and that, and there's a lot of hesitation about him, but he seems to be putting together a very sound administration. He has appointed very competent people, and particularly his foreign policy team. Very experienced, steady people, and they appear to be taking a different approach to India, Pakistan, and especially Pakistan.
And if I want to sort of ask you about the situation obtaining in the wider region in India's neighborhood, how do you look at the India-China relations from the prism of US-China relations? Is the US still hedging when it comes to China?
Well, I think we can have more trust in China, and they're a major trading partner of ours, and we need them, and they need us. And a lot of this rhetoric that flies around. And it appears to me that China has done a pretty good job. They seem to be, you know, it's true that to belong to the Communist Party there, you have to be a declared atheist. I'm not making any judgments about that. But on the other hand, they are professed Confucianists in the sense that they want to serve the public good, and their higher power or their God is to help the Chinese people. And they have made great strides for a big country, just as India has. They have a little different approach. But I don't think China is nearly, and China is not going to be taken in by Pakistan. I mean, those guys are going to have to, they know what they're dealing with there. But the Chinese are doing some pretty good foreign aid, some soft power things around the world, in Africa and elsewhere, and I say more power to them. But I don't think China has any territorial ambitions. I mean, I know they do. There's disputes with India over the borderline and so forth. But I think that...
But is China rising peacefully?
Well, you never know. These things are hard to say, but I think it wants to. And, you know, you have to live your life, you have to play the cards you're dealt. And Pakistan is there, and China is there, and it's not going to go away. And Russia is there, and it's not going to go away. And the United States is there, and it's not going to go away. So somehow, we providentially or something, or through good luck, or through, I hope we get through all this, but it's a very dangerous world.
Senator, in your book, you speak, as you said, about the Octopus, the military-industrial complex, which seems to control, the American deep state seems to control many of its policies. Now, if I were to just quote you, the current chairman of U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joseph Dunford, who at his reconfirmation hearing at the Senate Armed Forces Services Committee said, and he was asked this question by Senator John McCain, the chair of the committee, if I could just quote the question for you, do you believe it's possible for the U.S. to achieve its national security objectives in Afghanistan as long as Pakistan provides support and sanctuary to groups such as Taliban and Haqqani? He answered, says, I do not believe we can attain our objectives unless we materially change the behavior of Pakistan. Senator McCain goes on to ask Mr. Dunford, and have you got the thoughts on how you do that? The answer was all over the place. He didn't give a straight answer to the question. In your estimation, based on your experience, what needs to be done for America to get Pakistan right?
Okay, well, I believe that we should just do the opposite of what we've been doing. I've been saying this for 20 years. We should shut off all military cooperation and aid. We should make it clear to them that we, with some of their allies, we might, and this is a little dangerous to say, but that we should we would consider a first strike or a drone strike or this or that if we feel it's necessary to some of their behavior, that we consider them a terrorist state, and that we will treat them accordingly.
And Senator, today happens to be the 29th of September, exactly 1 year to the day. Last year, India conducted what was described as the surgical strikes across the line of control that divides the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, some would say things are slowly beginning to change on the ground, but many others would contest that submission and say, well, nothing has changed on the ground. Pakistan continues to behave the way it did, and Pakistan does not indicate anytime soon it will change its attitude or strategic orientation towards both India and Afghanistan. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that we have to be prepared to do certain types of surgical strikes and things like that. I'm personally very much against boots on the ground or anything. I think that's obsolete. We do have all this high technology naval equipment, and supposedly from our Navy ships we can do surgical strikes or with drones. But I think that some of President Trump's tough talk will have to be carried out, and also we should make Pakistan a terrorist state and cut off all aid and trade, and that includes even, well, our big banks still do the banking for Pakistan, things like that, that just should come to an end.
And you say, Senator, that Pakistan is more dangerous to the United States than North Korea. And as you mentioned in your book about the issue of nuclear disarmament or proliferation in the Indian subcontinent in particular. Now, what's the way out? How should America deal with the crises on its hands even as we speak, be it Pakistan, be it North Korea, and especially on the issue of the proliferation activities going on all around the world?
Well, we should make it clear that we expect the Pakistanis to have a regime in place that really controls those nuclear weapons that they have. And if they don't follow that, we should be prepared to take surgical type steps to carry it out, and that's very dangerous and very...
Surgical strikes to take out Pakistani nukes?
Yes, or their capability to launch them. And that's all, I know sounds a little far-fetched, but that's the kind of things that we have to be thinking about now. We've made this problem. We just can't let it go on.
On that note, Senator, thank you so much for speaking to WION. Appreciate it. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Nice to see you.
Once again.
Nice to see you. Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.